And I think this thing about the authenticity is, if you asked me, can I see myself living here permanently? The answer is absolutely, because I can actually envisage what daily life would look like.
Yeah.
And I know doesn't involve being overstressed about certain things. It just has a certain pace of life and environment around you that feels, it's more conducive to you feeling at peace.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Portugal.
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 Our vegetables are like rock stars.
Literally, Portugal is a small Disneyland for grown-ups.
You know, I think that Portugal is like my geographic soulmate.
It's hard to explain what it is because it's a feeling.
And when I went there, I absolutely fell in love with Portugal.
I wanted to feel the crunchiness.
Portugal, the Simple Life Podcast.
Portugal, the Simple Life Podcast.
And we're here on his podcast, Portugal Simple Life.
Portugal, the Simple Life Podcast. Your insider's perspective into Portugal. And our latest episode starts right now. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, the Simple Life. And it's another edition of My Home in Portugal. And I'm really happy to be joined here by Michael Tweedie. Michael, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome. We've been doing this, talking back and forth for how many years now?
A good, probably 4 or 5 almost.
4 or 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's go back to, actually, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I've lived in 5 countries.
Okay.
And I was
Which ones?
born and raised in South Africa and then UK.
You haven't lost the accent.
No, it's a difficult one to shake off.
It is. Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah.
And then the UK, then Switzerland, Denmark, and now I have Germany. But I think the one of the things that connects the dots through all of this is actually Portugal, because my mother was born and raised in a Portuguese environment.
Okay.
And that's kind of where the seeds started, I think, a long time ago.
Okay. Well, let's go to that. So you first started to hear about Portugal from your mom.
Yeah, and I was a little kid, and I think, I was brought up with a bit of the culture infused into my life, and also the food. So meals, and that always had a reminder of Portugal, even though I had not been there or spoke the language myself. And that's why I always dreamt I will own property in Portugal, but even not really knowing what it meant until I actually immigrated to Europe many years ago.
Amazing. Is that why you ended up with a Portuguese?
Yes, I just knew it was meant to be a Portuguese husband.
Yeah, it's Michael and Miguel.
Correct. It's
and
nice. Our sisters have the same names, our mothers have the same birthdays. It's a bit weird.
Besides the food, because obviously the food we all know is amazing, and we were talking when we were driving earlier about that little restaurant on the ridge, Tasca de Janeca, and the real typical Portuguese dish, the raw authenticity. But besides the food, what other things did you learn about Portugal from your mom?
It's mostly centered around the fact that people are very earthy. Very down to earth. So there's not, people are very relatable. Although there may be a perception of expressiveness related to the culture, etc. There's also something very laid back and toned down about it. And this is what actually appeals to me. So when you also come here, you feel, I know I'm not living here yet full time or anything like that, but you sort of feel a sense of calm and peace that comes over to you when you're in this area of Portugal. And this is what actually appeals to me the most. Yeah,
it's quite interesting because the Portuguese have that kind of Latin American, South American, South European reputation of being loud and emotional, but they're not quite like that. They're quite reserved, calm, discreet.
It is.
Nice, like you said, down to earth.
Exactly.
It's a great expression for them, yeah. And when you finally got to visit Portugal, did you feel that side of?
It was almost immediate, and I think it's because it was funny this morning when I asked you about when you moved here, because I sort of did the same thing. I looked at the map of Portugal, and when I decided I wanted to take a first step of actually having an investment.
Yes.
I've never been to the Algarve. even up to now.
Okay.
I've only been to Porto to fly in and out, and the only area I've zoomed into is actually the Silver Coast.
Okay.
And it's because when I looked at it and I did research, I realized this is my vision of what I think the raw Portugal is that I would like to. And so when I arrived here, I immediately felt like I've been here before.
Yeah.
And it felt homely in a sense.
That's interesting.
And
you bought an apartment with us now. I think it's 5 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
Had you been to Portugal before that?
No.
So you've never been here?
Never. And I think what really helped me actually was you, because apart from doing a bit of research myself, but it's a desktop exercise which only gets you so far. I think you really helped explain the area and what it's like, and really you sort of confirm more than just reading stuff through articles.
Okay.
So that's why I felt like I knew what I was going to get before I actually stepped. So that's why I felt really comfortable to actually make a first property purchase. It was during COVID.
Right. Yes.
And I think that you had very good materials, and you even had a drone recording of the land where the building was going to be made. So I think this made me feel like I really knew what I was going to get, and I was not disappointed at all.
Let's just take a step back. What were you kind of hoping to find at that stage? So you haven't been to Portugal. It's in the middle of COVID. You know that you're still not going to probably get to Portugal for some time. Okay, but you've made this decision now. I'm ready. I'm in the position where I can buy something. What were the kind of the checklists for you? What were you looking for in a location and in the property?
So I always knew I wanted to be at this ocean.
Okay, Atlantic.
Exactly. And so I didn't want to be inland, even though there's many that might work for many people. And I always wanted something with a sea view.
Okay.
And I'm probably more picky than most. And when I looked at the area and the climate of the Silver Coast, and yes, there's tourism, but there's a certain element of rawness to it, which is the attractiveness for me. I realized this is the place for me. And that's why when I started zooming in, you kind of see, of course, there's a very long coastline, but there's a reason some of the places are famous, like Nazaré for its waves, and there's obviously competitions there for surfing, etc. So that's why I zoomed into it, and it became a priority for me to look at this area around here.
So then you started looking online. Somehow, I can't exactly remember, because it was a while back how we got in touch. I think it must have been through an inquiry.
I think it was just an inquiry form.
Yeah. And I think probably we had a phone call to start.
Exactly.
Heard the South African accent.
Exactly.
Away.
This helped.
Yeah, of course. It's nice to deal with each other. But then from there, it was a case of, okay, well, I can't fly out to come and see, which is normally what people would do. It was then a question of, okay, well, let's look at this property in more detail. I remember from the beginning, you were very clear. I want a wow view. That was a given. Take us through what you remember of those next steps.
So I think you were very helpful, because I had very specific questions which I wanted answered for somebody that's actually physically here. So you did a very good job with this, and some of the practicalities, like kind of knowing what I'm actually going to get. Yeah. Because you're here, you've been to the piece of land where the development was going to be made. So you knew kind of, like, there's definitely going to be a sea view, even though it was maybe not a top floor apartment and stuff like this. So you were really good with this. And because it was the first time I was making a purchase, I've had property purchases in other countries, but knowing the specifics of how a Portuguese process works and when are you fully committed, how much money you're going to pay at what stage, etc., this was very clear. Yeah. So I think you gained my trust very quickly, and that's why I'm a returning customer as well.
We'll talk about that. So I mean, it was an interesting process, because you hadn't been here, you hadn't been to the site. We did do that virtual call on Zoom where you could see the views and things, but it was still just a piece of dirt with some 3Ds and a substantial deposit, and then you need to wait a little while for the thing to get built. What were some of those questions that were answered for you that made you feel, okay, I feel safe and secure enough to go ahead and do this?
I mean, at the end, it comes down to trusting somebody.
Yeah.
And you were able to speak reassuringly exactly how it's going to work. The people that you're involved with, say, from a development point of view, the people that you are familiar with, say, because, you know, as a foreigner, even though you're doing business in the EU, which comes with a certain level of good standards, you don't, you know what I mean? You never know for sure. So this is where I felt very comfortable, and you explain things very simply. So I think this is what won me over, that I can confidently invest without actually coming here. And I knew that when I arrived here, because I'd done so much research and you had explained to me, honestly, it felt like I was just stepping into something that I already had been here before. It was very easy.
Yeah. So let's go through that. So at what stage did you actually come?
It was,
and to see the property that you've already essentially bought.
It was, I cannot remember the exact dates, but it was probably a year later.
Okay, so there was in construction.
Yes, but it was literally the ground had been cleared.
Yeah.
And then at best, there was some very basic foundational work going on, but I think that was about it.
It was the garage.
Yeah. It was just exactly.
Because I think we stood on like just a patch of dirt. Like there's the garage, the basement, and this is where your apartment is going to be.
Exactly.
How did that feel at that stage? Did you feel like, okay, yeah, I've made a good decision here?
Definitely. I mean, when I stood on the land, looking at the view over that entire Bay Area, I realized this is definitely a winning property. So, and so again, there was no surprises.
Yeah.
Because I think we had really spoken sufficiently and you'd explained everything to me.
On that trip, because now that's your first time to Portugal. So your first time to Portugal is coming to see a property that you've already bought. What did you feel about the country? What was your experience like coming to Portugal on that trip?
It was super nice because these expectations, I guess one has, of it's kind of a chilled out environment. It's got a nice mixture of, it's a country that's got the infrastructure you're looking for, but it still has an element of rawness. And when you arrive in this area of Portugal, you genuinely feel like when you're driving through the little villages or on the towns and stuff, there is something really authentic still about it. The little cafes and things, you feel like you are in a Portugal that is not overly commercialized.
Yeah.
That's why I say I've never been to the Algarve, and no criticism to it. There's a reason it's popular.
Yeah.
I've never been there, but you really feel like you're stepping into something that is true to what it perceived from the outside, if you see what I mean.
Now, some people listening from wherever they are in the world could be listening going, you're absolutely bonkers. Like you don't even have a brick yet, in your name. But there were steps involved and you had people involved. Was that also a factor for you, that you knew that along the way you're going to have a legal support, you're going to have a project manager that's going to accompany you through showing you the different stages of the construction, helping you with the finishes? Was that did that also factor into your decision?
100%. Yeah, no, definitely. And the thing is that you can do it in English.
Yeah.
Because I don't speak Portuguese, and this is very reassuring, and this English is well spoken.
Yeah.
And knowing, because if you look at Leisure Lounge and you've got the full family of companies for people that need everything. In other words, not only just purchasing the property, but if you want it furnished, if you want it property managed, if you need anything with administration, i.e. your tax returns, knowing that I can use any of that if I need to, and I don't need to speak to 100 people.
Yeah.
This is very attractive for people, particularly if it's the first time and you really don't know, how are you going to one day turn on the electricity or the water or put your internet, everything. So I think this as well made me very comfortable.
When did you come back? When was the next time you came back to Portugal after that trip?
It was probably another year or so in, and then it was, so there were walls constructed, but nothing was finished. There was no interiors, etc.
Yeah.
So then it all became more
was
real.
Was that to choose your finishes with the project?
I think so.
Stage? Yeah.
And I think the reason that trip was very important to me is because the way the development was, where I was building, it was a ground floor apartment, and views are everything to me. So I wanted to see, am I still getting what I was hoping for? So that's why it was important for me to come there. And then I really got excited because then of course you can actually see how big the spacing of the rooms are and everything else. And again, I was not disappointed. It was really nice.
Amazing.
Okay, I left. After spending most of the day here with somebody from your team, feeling very excited, and that's why I even knew this is probably not the only investment I will make, because I really feel like it was a good and it filled everything I was looking for.
The next time coming back, was that when the property was finished?
Well, it was just before it was finished, so there was I think there was still interiors were not quite done yet, etc. But again, it was all looking very nice. And then I had to come one more time, and it was actually handover.
So you did the whole thing of going into the notary with the lawyer.
Exactly.
Reading out the titles. the big table full of people.
Exactly. And I mean, it's all formalities, but the good thing is, at least all the way through, what I really appreciated was the lawyer, who's independent, was very good with communicating, so telling me what's coming, and it was really not very complicated at all.
Yeah.
But from the leisure group, you get photographs systemically through the project, so you can see what's going on.
What's happening.
And they're very mindful of including pictures that you can see your apartment or your property. It's not just generic stuff. And what was really nice is you also personally, because you're using WhatsApp, if you were going there, you would actually take a picture from the spot where your unit is and actually send it, which is super nice of you, because then you sort of go, okay, I still can see what's going on. So this is very nice. It's very nice.
I can still see the ocean.
Correct, because if you just get generic pictures from, I don't know, the parking lot or whatever, this is nice, but it's not
my unit.
Yeah, exactly. So this was very nice.
How did it feel then coming back to a finished apartment? So it's been this 1.5, 2-year journey. You've stood on a patch of land to now you've got windows, you've got doors, you've got the finishes that you've chosen, and you're looking out at this. How did that moment feel for you?
It feels a bit surreal because for me, I've been dreaming about that for a very long time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you feel a bit, you have sort of a lump in your throat because it all becomes, you're like, this is mine. And so I felt super happy about it. And it was lovely.
Between my job as a realtor at Portugal Realty and hosting this podcast, life is pretty busy. But lately I've been receiving so many messages from people that want to know more about buying property here on Portugal's Silver Coast that I've got to do something about it. So starting now, for subscribers only, I'm offering up a 30-minute session per day. That's 5 30-minute sessions for a one-on-one meeting to talk about buying property here on Portugal's beautiful Silver Coast. This is for subscribers only. So please subscribe to book your session and get in touch with us through the links below via WhatsApp or email to book your session today. I'll be happy to speak to you. It's for subscribers only and it's completely free. At that stage, are you thinking long-term with this property? Are you thinking, I'm going to live here, or this is a stepping stone to something more? What were your thoughts at that? Are you ready? Because you're quite you think way ahead. So what were your thoughts at that moment?
So
with this particular investment?
You're right. I was probably a bit premature in thinking this was a property that I was going to use. I'm still fairly young, but I still wanted to use it for big chunks of the year, maybe not living here permanently. So I bought it for this purpose.
Yeah.
But when it was finished, then I realized actually in terms of life stage, I'm actually not that ready to use it that much. And I felt I didn't necessarily want to hang on to it and rent it out sporadically. So I thought, well, let me keep myself open. And now I feel more comfortable. I know the area. I know how it works. I know the lawyer, etc.
Yeah.
I'd rather buy something else at another time. And also because it's a good return on investment, the property prices in this area, yes, I'm sure it will still continuously evolve, have been fairly moderate in the past. So you're still getting value for money and capital growth. So that's why I thought I'm comfortable to let this one go, and I will look for other investments. And that's why I've also bought 2 more from you afterwards.
Okay, so it wasn't like, okay, now I'm stuck with this thing, and I'm going to have to see it out, or whatever the case is. You had that flexibility. The property investment gave you the flexibility to be able to say, well, okay, actually, let me sell it. I'm going to do reasonably well from selling it.
Exactly.
And give me that flexibility to take something that will better suit the next stage of my life and the next stage of my career and things like that.
You're right, because the property markets in different parts of the world have different dynamics. And here, the good thing is, even if some circumstances change, I think you shouldn't be scared that you're going to be stuck with a property that you don't want for multiple years. The market is dynamic enough, and there's enough interest in this area and in Portugal that you'll be able to sell it or do something with it, rent it out or something. So I don't think this should be a fear factor from my point of view.
Yeah. Let's just talk about the area and again back to Portugal, because now you've owned this property. You own this property now. You've visited. You've used it. You've come previously. What are the other things that you kind of learned about Portugal and this area in that time frame that made you even more? Because the guy that I see today is a guy that's just completely comfortable here and in love with the place. To the guy who came the first time, who didn't know anything about the area. What are the things that have happened and that you've learned about Portugal in that time frame?
I think you can be assured that things get done well, even if they take a little longer sometimes. So you just be patient, because depending on who you're dealing with, and if it's, and I'm not talking about you or the company, but like from a government point of view, if there's something that project is running a bit longer because there's some approvals or something is delayed, don't get too stressed about it. So that's why I'm also very comfortable with if things are a little bit off track, they'll get back on track. You are dealing with a first world country at the end of the day. But I feel very comfortable. I really feel it's like home away from home, even though it sounds super weird because I haven't lived here permanently. But it just feels right. And I haven't had any bad experiences with any people. Yes, you can get strange people in all over the world, but people genuinely mean well, and they are just laid back. So when you're dealing with them, etc., just take them in the spirit. It's their country. At the end of the day, you're the one arriving here. So also just be mindful of that, because people genuinely are very nice. And they are humble.
Well, I mean, you've been doing business in Germany, Denmark. We were actually talking when we were driving about how when you go do a title deed in Denmark, you don't actually deal with a human being.
No.
It's all digital, which is super efficient and everything. But did you enjoy that aspect of actually when you're sitting at the title deed, there's 6 people there and you're dealing with human beings who are kind and happy to help? Was that something that you value now and enjoy?
Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, it was... it actually made it feel more real. Because I was sitting there, and there was all formalities and signing contracts and making sure the final payments were happening. But it somehow made me feel like, okay, now I've really should be proud that they've actually bought a property.
Yeah.
And people were very nice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They were very respectful.
Yeah.
It's a nice moment for you as well.
I find it so. When you go to those, sit in a title deed at a public notary, and it is a formal thing. I mean, it's a legal formality. There's somebody typing minutes. There's a lawyer. There's the developer. But people are sitting having a chat as well. You know, talking about food and talking about the weather and talking about. And I just find that so comforting. There's almost that human element hasn't been lost in the transaction, which is lovely.
I agree with you, and they were also very mindful that even though the formalities have to be done in Portuguese, they take the time to explain to you in English, for example. So it was very nice. But I felt like there was a sense of it is a formality, but people were being nice to you as well, if you know what I mean. So it was very pleasant.
I think what's interesting with you kind of I would describe as kind of a hybrid investor, where it's not just this cold kind of transactional thing for you. There is a sentimental element to it. You truly like the place and the people. But now what's happened is you've got this apartment, you've sold it, and the next step, I think it must have been a couple of weeks later, you're like, Dylan, let's go, what's next?
Exactly.
What was it just put your investor hat on, because you're a guy that travels a lot. I think you told me 100 flights a year. So you've got that mobility factor, which I think is becoming a huge part of the world today, where people don't have to be tied to one particular location, especially if you're part of the EU, even a resident in the EU like you are. You can get around. You can be in 3 different places a year. And you can call more than one place a home, which I think is a wonderful thing in today's world. But from an investor perspective, what is it about this area where you thought, I want to invest again, that you saw in your research in looking around?
So if you just take the financial side, there's still good value to be had in this area. You know, probably if you go to, I don't know, Lisbon and places like this, maybe it's a very different property market and it's more saturated. So there's more value to be had just from this point of view, but that's only one side of the conversation.
So from that perspective, you're looking at, okay, I'm investing and there's still room for my investment to grow long-term to medium-term.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's not like you're sitting on a property bubble where you could actually lose money.
Yes.
You know, there's many cities where the demand has taken over so much so this is really like a non-concern you should have if you're investing there. And for me, it's just the whole environment is beautiful. I mean, we're driving around today and where you've got all these protected areas. For me, it is extremely charming. You can't put a price on this. These beautiful pine trees, this fine vegetation that's along the coastline. This is where I feel this connection of being at home. It's just absolutely gorgeous, and you never feel like, even when maybe there's a small period in July and August when it's a bit more busy, but even when it's busy, I've been here in July. It's not like busy depending on where you are used to in the world, that you feel things are overwhelming. You still have the sense of calmness somehow. Maybe for the locals it's very busy at that time of the year, but for me as a foreigner, it still feels super nice.
But I think there's an important thing that you've hit on, and we were driving through that coastal area north of Nazaré today, and for me, it's just nice sometimes to be with somebody like you or like a client who's seeing it with fresh eyes, because we drive along here all the time and we see these things all the time when we live here. But it's a place where it's still so well protected. It's so untouched. They haven't overdeveloped. And then there's 2 things that you've referred to there. One, how charming it feels and how it feels. And because of the fact that they've controlled how much they've developed, you know it's always going to feel the same way.
Exactly.
It's hugely satisfying from a personal and just the way that it feels when you visit. But also on the investment side, you know, I'm not going to be competing here with another 1,000 units, which becomes interesting for your investment as well.
No, it is. And I think this thing about the authenticity is, if you asked me, can I see myself living here permanently? The answer is absolutely, because I can actually envisage what daily life would look like.
Yeah.
And I know doesn't involve being overstressed about certain things. It just has a certain pace of life and environment around you that feels it's more conducive to you feeling at peace.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean.
Which I think, and we were talking about that in the car as well, like we're in a world today where we don't ever stop, and there's noise and there's madness and there's political instability and wars, and then it's almost like you come here and everything's just slows down and goes back to basics almost. And like I could see you felt that when we were driving around, that it's just this bringing it back to the normal things and the simple things. And we talk about Portugal, the simple life, and it's that.
It is this. Exactly. I mean, even for me today, I'm only here for one day. I feel like I go back and I realize again, it is the right spot for me.
Yeah.
So it's been really nice.
So now the search is for Mike's permanent home. We know we're not going to divulge what you're looking for, but are you excited about the next few years? These next 2 properties will be done in a couple of years.
Exactly.
And then it's next phase.
I want something for me.
For you. Yeah, we'll make.
I know we know what that looks like.
We've mentioned a little bit about the Portuguese people and you've now been in a position where you've dealt with a lot of Portuguese people from different aspects of the property sector, but professionalism, but restaurants and things like that. What do you want people to know about the Portuguese? What should they know about the Portuguese people?
I feel they're actually very calm inside.
Yeah.
So you don't, they may be perceived as being very intense, like from the outside world. Yeah. I think this is actually untrue. I think there's an inner sense of calm. They actually want to be helpful. They're actually very nice people at the end of the day. So I think this is the most important thing. So you don't feel like you go anywhere, anybody means any bad. And it doesn't really matter who you are, I think. So if you're arriving here from another country, from another background, they're actually super nice. And if they can't speak English, it's probably because you're in a very, very small little place and just unfortunately but you can pretty much speak English in most places. Yeah. And even if it's a bit of broken conversation, you will figure it out somehow. Yeah. So I think people just I think they are super nice.
Yeah. How does this place, because you mentioned also when you're driving that we're talking about Denmark and you mentioned how Denmark has changed you. How do you feel like Portugal has changed you? How does it feel when you come back here, even if it's just for a weekend, even if it's just for a week? How do you feel like this? How does this place make you feel when you come back?
I feel a bit excited because I think I found a spot, because I know Europe is the right place for me, for many factors in my life. But I feel like I found a spot that can work for me and makes me feel like the most important things in life are actually here. So it's a combination of the people, the weather, the food, the natural part of the environment. Yeah. So when you tick all these boxes, I see it here. Yeah. Whereas when you start zooming around the rest, particularly of Europe, either there are countries which are very well run, but then they have really awful weather. So you've always got to compromise. Yeah. And I think the compromises here, depending on what a person is looking for, are ones which I can absolutely live with.
Yeah. Amazing. Do you feel like, because you've got an interesting backstory where it's South African, but you've lived in all these different countries, different cultures. Do you feel like this is a place where you're yourself, where you can just be Mike, and there's none of that? We were talking about how the Portuguese never ask you what you do. They just ask you about who you are, and that's something so refreshing. Coming from South Africans, it was, what do you do? That's your status, that's your kind of hat that you wear. Do you feel like here you can just come and be yourself, be
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about. So you don't have to be overly self-aware of anything.
Yeah.
Because I think the Portuguese is obviously a very, very long history to this country, which is infused into the culture. So they are used to others of various backgrounds. So you don't need to overthink or be aware, oh, I'm not from here, or I'm different to somebody else. So I think absolutely, I don't even think twice about that I'm not from here, or I don't speak Portuguese. I can just do what I need to do. So it feels, that's why I say it strangely, it just feels like home somehow.
Yeah. For people that wanting to do what you've done, invest, potentially sell again, invest in an off-plan property or two like what you've done, what advice would you want to give to people?
I think if you are going to take that step, don't be scared or afraid to do it, but also you should do a research a little bit yourself. I mean, I do that with pretty much everything in life. So, there's technology has advanced a lot, and there's AI tools, etc., which can help you. But I would definitely do a little bit of research so that you don't get unwelcome surprises which you're not expecting, in addition to the support that you would give, etc. But always do reading, Google till death do you part, and look at the stuff that's most important for you, because that's why I think probably I've been so satisfied with investing is because I did look before and read what others say about it, etc. So, and look at maps. Sometimes when you're looking at a geographical area, I really zoom into what is even in the different streets of the towns, what facilities are there, because then you feel like you kind of know what you're signing up for.
Yeah, good advice. You mentioned how when you come back here, it feels homely. Why does Portugal feel like home?
It's this sounds a bit positive from a negative point of view. There's nothing to offend you here. So there's no, you don't feel like there's people judging you. The weather's very nice. I struggle to find fault with things that are off-putting. It's basically just got so many things in its favor. And I think it is probably the most important one is probably you feel the sense of calm. Because when you're living a life which happens like it feels like it's in fast forward all the time, and you come here, you really feel like you can breathe again. So that's why I think it just feels right.
Yeah, I love that. Very, very nice. Thank you for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure, and we'll find you that dream home. It's the one for you.
Man, thanks for having me.
So thank you once again to our guest, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We always love to hear from you. Don't forget, Portugal The Simple Life also has a magazine, so download it. It's for free. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode, and as we say in Portugal, sejas bem-vindo. Welcome to The Simple Life.